My mother read the letter out loud. She read it standing at the kitchen counter on a Tuesday evening in March, in the particular even voice she used for things she had already decided about. Not angry, not shaking. Even, she read the part about the offer. She read the part about the scholarship. She read the part about the start date in September. Then she folded the letter once along the middle. She turned on the gas hob. She held the letter over the flame until the corner caught. She held it by the opposite corner and let it burn down toward her fingers, and when it was close enough, she dropped it into the washing up bowl where it finished in the water. She said 3 words. This is not us. She dried her hands on the dish towel. She went to the sitting room. The television came on. I stood at the kitchen table and looked at the black curl of paper in the washing up bowl. I was 18 years old. My name is Anna. I am 34 now. I am a structural engineer. I have been one for 8 years, which means I am professionally trained to understand how weight is distributed, how a structure holds, where the stress concentrates, where it will break if it is asked to carry more than it was built for. I understand load paths. I understand what happens when one person in a family has been carrying something for a long time, that the structure was never designed to distribute evenly. I understood it in the way you understand things before you have the words for it, standing in that kitchen at 18. I left at 5 the next morning. I came back 9 years later. What I put on my Gran's kitchen table when I came back, that is the part my mother still cannot speak about. Before I take you back, if you're new here, welcome to her Breaking Point Stories. Every day, a real story about the moment a woman stopped being what her family decided she was and chose herself instead. Hit subscribe. Now, let me show you the tradition. The tradition in our house had a name. Nobody had given it the name. It had accumulated one, the way traditions do, through repetition, through the particular gravity of things that have happened before, through the way certain sentences are said in certain kitchens as though they are not sentences at all but simply descriptions of how the world is arranged. The tradition was this. The women in our family did not go far. My Gran Eileen had left school at 16 and married at 19 and moved from one end of the same Yorkshire town to the other, 3 miles, and had never lived more than 30 minutes from her mother's house. My mum, Patricia, had done the same. Left school at 16. Worked at the bakery on the high street for 4 years. Married my father Gerald at 22. Moved into the semi-detached on Quarry Lane that they had lived in ever since. 7 minutes by car from Gran Eileen's house. My Aunt Maureen, my Aunt Deborah, all of them. The geography of their lives was the same geography, the same 3 square miles of West Yorkshire, the same school run, the same high street, the same Christmas dinner at Gran's every year without exception. This was not presented as a limitation. It was presented as a choice, as a value, as evidence of the kind of woman you were: grounded, loyal, present, not drifting, not chasing, not above yourself. That phrase, I heard it often growing up, not above yourself, said about women on the television who had gone to London, said about distant cousins who had moved to Edinburgh or Bristol, said with a particular tone, not cruel, not envious, something more precise than either. Dismissive. The tone of people who have decided that a certain kind of ambition is a kind of betrayal. I was above myself from approximately the age of 8. I did not know that was the word for it. I knew I read things that weren't on the school reading list. I knew I sat at the back of maths lessons doing problems from the year above because the current ones were finished. I knew that when my teacher in year 9, Mr. Casson, suggested I try for the county science competition, I felt something in my chest that I later understood was hope, specific, directional hope, the kind that points somewhere. I didn't tell my mother about the competition. I won it. I put the certificate in the inside pocket of my school bag and kept it there. My sister Sophie was 4 years younger than me and more like our mother. Not in ability, Sophie was sharp, funny, perceptive in ways that had nothing to do with formal education, but in temperament, in the ease with which she inhabited the geography of our family. She did not feel what I felt. She did not sit at the kitchen table after dinner doing extra problems in an exercise book with her door closed. She played out, she watched telly, she helped with the baking on Saturdays without being asked. She was easier to love loudly in the way our family loved. I was easier to love quietly, at a distance, with a slight wariness, the way you love something you don't fully understand and are not certain you can keep. I understood this. I did not resent Sophie for it. What I felt, if I am honest, was something closer to protectiveness. Even then, at 14, 15, a dim awareness that she was inside the tradition in a way I was not, and that what I did next would affect what options she could see for herself. I filed that thought away. I kept adding to it. I need to tell you what I did in the year before the letter arrived, because I had been preparing for a long time. I had been doing it in the only place I had privacy, the school library, Tuesday and Thursday lunchtimes, and Saturday mornings when my mother thought I was covering a shift at the co-op. I had a plan. The plan depended on not being caught before it was complete. The library was on the second floor of Thornfield Comprehensive. It had 12 tables, a section of fiction that nobody used, and a bank of 3 computers against the far wall that the librarian, Mrs. Beach, had to sign you onto with a teacher code. Mrs. Beach was 53, had been there since before I started school, and had a memory for what books students checked out that was precise and permanent. She remembered specifically that I had checked out a structural engineering textbook from the reference section in Year 10, which was not something Year 10 students did, and that I had returned it 3 days later with a note on a post-it inside the front cover that said, "The chapter on load paths is wrong in places. Anna C." Mrs. Beach had kept the post-it. She showed it to me once, much later. She was the first person who knew, not because I told her, because she paid attention. In the January of my upper 6th, I sat 5 A levels: maths, further maths, physics, chemistry, and design technology. I revised alone in the evenings at the kitchen table after the washing up was done, with the radio on low so my mother would think I was just sitting. She did not ask what I was revising for. I had not told her I was sitting 5. I got 4 A stars and an A. I told no one. I went to Mrs. Beach's room on the Monday of results week and sat in her office chair while she read the slip. She read it once. She read it again. She put it on the desk. She folded her hands. She said, "Anna, have you applied anywhere?" I said, "Not yet." She looked at me. She said, "Why not?" I said, "I needed the results first to know if it was worth the trouble." She said, "It is worth the trouble." She gave me 2 hours a week in her office on the library computer, signed in on her code from September onwards. She sat at the desk correcting exercise books while I researched courses and entry requirements and scholarship funds. She never looked at the screen. She never asked what I was applying to. She asked once in November, "Have you told your parents?" I said, "Not yet." She said, "When will you?" I said, "When I know whether it worked." She accepted that. She turned back to remarking, "I applied to 6 universities. The top choice was the University of Sheffield, Civil and Structural Engineering. Full course. 4 years. The scholarship application required a personal statement, 2 academic references, and a letter from a current or recent employer. Mrs. Beach wrote one of the academic references. Mr. Casson wrote the other. The employer letter came from the site manager at a small construction firm on the edge of town, where I had been working Saturday mornings for 14 months. His name was Phil. I had walked in and asked if I could shadow the structural surveyor on site for no pay, which Phil had found funny enough that he said yes, and then started paying me after 3 weeks because I was actually useful. Phil wrote the letter in 15 minutes at his site office desk. He spelled my name wrong twice. He meant every word. The offer came in February, a Thursday. I collected the post before my mother came downstairs. I had been collecting the post every morning for 6 weeks. The letter was thick. I read it in the upstairs bathroom with the door locked. Unconditional offer. Full scholarship for the first 2 years based on academic merit. Accommodation included. I sat on the edge of the bath. I made a decision I will always be glad I made. I walked to the library before school. I photocopied the letter on Mrs. Beach's office machine. I gave the photocopy to Mrs. Beach. I said, "Keep this somewhere." She looked at it. She looked at me. She said, "You've told them?" I said, "Tonight." She put the photocopy in the locked drawer of her filing cabinet. She said, "Anna, whatever happens tonight, this is real. This belongs to you. It cannot be taken." I said, "I know. I went to school." I told my mother at 7:30. My father was in the garage. Sophie was upstairs. My Gran had gone home at 6 after her regular Tuesday tea. I sat at the kitchen table. My mother was at the counter slicing bread for the next day's packed lunches. I put the letter on the table in front of me. I said, "Mum, I've been offered a place at Sheffield Engineering full scholarship." She did not stop slicing. She said, "When did you apply?" I said, "September." The slicing stopped. She said, "Without telling us." I said, "Yes, I wanted to know if I'd get in before I started a conversation about whether I should try." She put the bread knife down. She picked up the letter. She read it in the way she read things she had already decided about, not taking it in, moving through it, looking for the part that confirmed what she thought. She read it out loud, methodically, the offer, the scholarship, the start date. Then she folded it, held it over the hob. dropped it in the washing up bowl. 3 words, "This is not us." She dried her hands. She went to the sitting room. I stood at the kitchen table and looked at the black curl in the bowl. I was not surprised. Some part of me had been waiting for exactly this response since September. That is why I had made the photocopy. That is why I had given it to Mrs. Beach. The surprise was not the burning. The surprise was how quiet it was. I did not sleep. I waited. My mother went to bed at 10:30. My father came in from the garage at 11 and went straight up. Sophie's light went off at midnight. I went downstairs at 1:30. I made tea. I drank it at the kitchen table in the dark. I thought about the construction site on Saturday mornings, about the weight of the surveyor's measuring equipment, about the load path diagrams Phil had let me copy from the site drawings, about the way a structure, properly designed, distributes force through every member, not concentrating it in one place, not asking one beam to carry what should be spread across 20. I thought about my mother. I thought about my Gran. I thought about what it costs over a lifetime to be the beam that carries everything alone. At 3, I went upstairs. I put 3 changes of clothes in my school rucksack, my A-level certificates in a clear plastic wallet, my savings, 62 pounds, all of it from the construction site, in the inside zip pocket, a photograph of Sophie taken at Christmas that I had carried in my purse for a year, my toothbrush, my spare glasses, my father's old compass from his apprenticeship that he had given me without ceremony when I was 12 and said he had no use for. I wrote one note to Sophie, half a page. I told her I loved her. I told her she was the best person I knew. I told her to keep her options open, all of them, even the ones that felt impossible. I slid it under her bedroom door at 4:45. I came down the stairs in socks. The kitchen light was on. My father was at the kitchen table with a mug of tea and his hands flat on the table in front of him. He had not been to bed. He was wearing his work clothes. He looked at me when I came through the door and he did not say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "Early bus is 6:05." I said, "I know." He reached into the chest pocket of his work shirt. He took out 2 folded 20s and a 10. He held them out. I took them. 50 pounds. He said, "The scholarship, it covers the accommodation." I said, "Yes." He nodded once. He looked at his tea. He said, "Your mum loves you." I said, "I know, Dad." He said, "She's wrong." I looked at him. He said it again, quietly, matter-of-factly, with the particular precision of a man who has chosen his words very carefully over a long period of silence. "She's wrong." He picked up his mug. He drank his tea. I picked up my rucksack. I walked out the back door. It was the 3rd of March. It was cold the way March mornings are cold, not dramatic, just relentless. I could see my breath. I walked to the bus station on the high street. I bought a single to Sheffield. I did not look back at the house. Before I tell you what the 9 years looked like, I need to stop for one moment. Because if you have ever stood at a kitchen table and watched someone burn something that belonged to you, something you had worked for quietly without asking anyone's permission, I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story is already sitting in your chest, give it a like so more women can find it. Okay. The first year was the hardest. Not academically. The work was hard and I loved it, the particular difficulty of things that ask everything of your attention and give you the satisfaction of precision in return. I loved the drafting. I loved the materials science. I loved the Tuesday afternoon structural analysis seminars where the teaching fellow drew load diagrams on the board, and I sat in the second row and understood, in a way that felt like recognition, every line. The first year was hard because of the silence from home. I emailed my mother in October. A short email. My address, my course. A sentence about the accommodation, no request, no apology, no reply. I emailed Sophie at the address I had found by asking a school friend to pass it along. Sophie replied in 3 hours. The email was breathless, present tense, a paragraph about the dog and a paragraph about her GCSE choices and a sentence at the end that said, "Mum said not to contact you. I'm contacting you." I read that sentence 4 times. I replied, "Good." Sophie and I emailed every 2 weeks for the next 4 years. She told me about school. I told her about the bridge design project and the site visits and the Tuesday seminars. We did not talk about our mother directly. We talked around her the way you talk around a piece of furniture that has been placed in the middle of a room for no apparent reason, noting its existence by the way you navigate the space. I graduated in 4 years with a first-class degree. Mrs. Beach came. She drove herself 2.5 hours from West Yorkshire and sat in the 3rd row of the ceremony hall in a navy jacket. And she clapped when my name was called with the particular contained satisfaction of someone who has been waiting for a specific moment for a long time. Afterward, she handed me an envelope. Inside was the photocopy she had kept in her locked filing cabinet for 4 years. She said, "You won't need this anymore." I said, "I'm keeping it." She said, "I know." My father had not come. He had sent a card. A plain card, the kind you buy in a petrol station, with a £5 note inside that I think was genuinely all he had on him. The note inside said, "Proud Dad." My mother had not sent anything. Sophie sent a photograph of herself at her own sixth form holding her provisional A-level predictions, grinning at the camera. She had written on the back, "AAB predicted. Engineering at Leeds, thinking about it." I framed the photograph, I put it on my desk. I joined a structural engineering firm in Sheffield at 22, a junior position, the kind where you spend the first year making tea and checking other people's calculations and absorbing everything you can. By year 3, I was leading site visits. By year 5, I had my chartered engineer status. My mentor was a woman named Dr. Helen Marsh, 54, 20 years in the industry. She had come up at a time when being a woman in structural engineering meant spending significant effort just being taken seriously, and she had used that effort efficiently and without resentment, and had arrived at her 50s with a reputation so solid that even the people who might have preferred otherwise couldn't argue with the buildings she had built. She told me, "In my second year at the firm, Anna, you calculate like you're afraid of being wrong." I said, "I am afraid of being wrong." She said, "Good engineers are the ones who aren't scare me, but you double-check things that don't need double-checking. You stay late to confirm figures you already know are right." I said, "Is that problem?" She said, "It will be when you have a team who needs you to be certain, and you spend the certainty you should be giving them on reassuring yourself." I went home that evening and I sat with that. I thought I spent 18 years being told my calculations were wrong about myself, about what I was worth, about where I should go. I thought, I have been compensating for that ever since. I am still compensating. I made a note in my work journal, one sentence. Learn to trust the answer once it is checked. I read it every Monday morning for 2 years. I need to tell you about the box. The one that arrived at my Sheffield flat on a Wednesday in October, 7 years after I had left. I had not been expecting a package from home. The return address was handwritten, and I almost did not recognize it. What was inside is the reason I started planning the visit. The reason I drove back to West Yorkshire 9 months later with a briefcase. The reason everything changed at kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon. The box arrived on a Wednesday. Brown cardboard, well taped, the return address in handwriting I recognized as Sophie's. Not my mother's, not my father's. Sophie. I opened it at my kitchen counter with a Stanley knife. Inside, packed in newspaper, was a biscuit tin. The old one from Gran Eileen's kitchen, a blue Quality Street tin that had sat on the second shelf of her kitchen dresser for as long as I could remember. Used for keeping rubber bands and spare buttons and batteries that may or may not still have charge. I had seen that tin every Sunday of my childhood. I lifted the lid, the rubber bands were gone, the batteries were gone. Inside the tin in neat order were 3 things. A small cream envelope with my name on it in handwriting I did not immediately recognize, not Sophie's, not my mother's. Older, slower, more deliberate. A folded document. 2 pages handwritten with a solicitor's rubber stamp in the corner. And a photograph, faded to that particular warm yellow of photographs from the 1970s. A young woman standing outside what looked like a college building, holding a folder against her chest. She was smiling, not the careful, managed smile of posed photographs. A real smile, the kind that doesn't know it's being watched. I recognized the cheekbones, the set of the shoulders. It was my Gran, Eileen. She was perhaps 19. I sat down. I opened the cream envelope first. The handwriting inside was Sophie's. "Anna, I found this in Gran's airing cupboard when we were clearing her room. She went into the care home in August. I don't think Mum knows this tin exists. I'm sending it to you because I think you're the only person who will understand what it means. I don't know the full story. I think you might be able to work it out. I'm sorry it's taken me this long to find it. I'm sorry for a lot of things. SPS, I applied to Leeds. Engineering, they said yes. I haven't told Mum yet." I set the letter down. I picked up the folded document. It was a letter dated September 1974. The letterhead was from the Sheffield College of Technology, now part of Sheffield Hallam University. The salutation read, "Dear Miss Eileen Margaret Whitworth." It was an offer of a place. Foundation year in construction and building management. A partial bursary covering half the fees. Enrollment date, 15th October 1974. I turned the page. The second page was the same letter, in two pieces, carefully taped back together with the kind of brown parcel tape that was available in 1974. The tape dried and cracked with age. The tear was clean, it had been folded and torn, the same way you fold and tear something deliberately. The letter was 50 years old. The tape was 50 years old. My Gran had taped her own offer letter back together in 1974. She had kept it for 50 years in a biscuit tin on the second shelf of her kitchen dresser. She had never gone. Someone had torn her letter and she had taped it and she had stayed. And she had raised daughters who stayed and she had raised granddaughters who stayed except one. Except me. I sat at my kitchen counter until the light changed. I thought about load paths. I thought about what happens when a force passes through a structure unchanged. When it doesn't dissipate, doesn't redistribute, just transfers from member to member, generation to generation, intact and undiminished. My Gran's torn letter, my mother's burning, the same force 50 years apart. Someone had torn Eileen's letter in 1974. Eileen had taped hers and stayed and torn my mother's options quietly in every conversation across a lifetime, and my mother had burned mine without a second thought on a Tuesday evening as naturally as lighting the hob. And I had left. I was the first one to leave. I thought I cannot be the last. I opened my laptop. I read Sophie's postscript again. I applied to Leeds. Engineering, they said yes. I typed, don't tell Mum yet. I'm coming home. I gave myself 4 months. I needed to prepare the way I prepared for anything that mattered methodically, without rushing, checking the calculations twice. Sophie and I talked on the phone for the first time since I had left. An hour and 40 minutes on a Thursday evening. I learned about the 9 years I had missed in the order that felt most important to her. Our father's retirement, the dog that had died, Gran's slow decline toward the care home, Sophie's own quiet rebellion of staying in education past 16, past 18, into a world she had built mostly alone, because I had left before I could show her how. She said, I used to be angry at you for leaving. I said, I know. She said, I'm not anymore. I said, what changed? She said, I found the tin. I called a solicitor, a woman recommended by a colleague, family and trust law, an office in Sheffield city centre. Her name was Miriam Osai. I met her on a Tuesday morning and explained what I wanted. A trust for educational purposes. Any descendant of Patricia and Gerald Cooper, my parents age 17 or over, accepted into any accredited course, university, college, apprenticeship, trade qualification. No gender restriction, no geographic restriction, no requirement to stay. Miriam said, how much? I told her. She wrote it down. She said, you want to name it? I thought about this. I said, the Eileen Cooper Education Trust. Miriam looked up. I said she was my grandmother. She had a letter once. She taped it back together and kept it 50 years. Miriam said, she'll never know it's named for her. I said, she'll never need to. The trust was signed and funded on a Monday in May. Miriam handed me the document in a plain white envelope. I put it in the briefcase alongside 3 other things. The first was my degree certificate, the actual original, not a copy, in its presentation folder. The second was the photograph of my Gran at 19, standing outside a college building she never entered. The third was the taped offer letter from 1974, Gran's letter, the one Sophie had found in the tin. I had handled it carefully. The tape had cracked through 50 years. The tear was still held. I drove back to West Yorkshire on a Sunday in September. 9 years and 6 months since the morning I had walked out the back door in socks. Sophie had chosen the occasion. Gran Eileen's 82nd birthday. A gathering at my parents' house, 20-odd people, family, 2 of Gran's church friends, neighbors. Gran had been brought from the care home for the afternoon. Sophie had told my mother I was coming. My mother had said, fine. One word, Sophie had texted it to me. I had said, that's enough. I parked the car on Quarry Lane at 12:30. The house looked the same. The same privet hedge, one side slightly longer than the other. The same wheelie bins in the same position. The hanging basket by the front door, which my mother replaced every spring. I sat in the car for 2 minutes. I got out. I took the briefcase from the passenger seat. I knocked. My mother opened the door. She had aged. Not dramatically. She was 58, healthy, solid. But the years were in her face in the way they get in when you have been carrying things. She looked at me. I looked at her. She said, come in then. She turned and walked back toward the kitchen. I stepped inside. The house smelled like Sunday. Roast and washing powder and the particular note of the air freshener she had used since I was 5. The sitting room had 22 people in it. Aunts, cousins, neighbors. Gran Eileen in the armchair by the window in her good cardigan, smaller than I remembered, her hands in her lap. My father saw me first. He crossed the room without rushing. He put both hands on my shoulders and looked at me for a moment. Then he nodded once. He went back to the conversation he had been in. Rosie was on the carpet. Sophie's daughter, 5 years old, dark hair, her mother's eyes, her grandmother's stubbornness already visible in the set of her jaw. She was building something with wooden blocks with a concentration that did not leave room for adult interruptions. I sat on the floor beside her. She looked at me. She said, "Who are you?" I said, "Your Auntie Anna." She considered this. She said, "Mum said you went away." I said, "I did." She said, "Where?" I said, "University, then work." She picked up a wooden block. She looked at it. She said, "What's university?" I said, "A place you go to learn something you're very interested in." She said, "Can you go if you want to?" I said, "Yes." She placed the block carefully on top of the tower. She said, "Good." The birthday toast was at 2 o'clock. My Gran stood with her stick. My mother stood beside her. My Aunt Maureen poured the Prosecco. 22 glasses went up. Gran said the thing she always said at family gatherings. I had heard it 20 times growing up. I had thought it was simply a thing grandmothers said. The women in this family know their place, and their place is here, with the people who love them. That's what it means to be one of us. 22 glasses went up. Rosie, on the carpet, did not have a glass. She was building her tower. Sophie looked at me across the room. I put my glass down. I picked up the briefcase. I walked to the dining table, which had been cleared after lunch. I opened the briefcase. The room went quiet the way rooms go quiet when something changes register, when the atmosphere shifts from social to something more serious and everyone senses it before they understand it. I took out Gran's photograph first. I held it up so the room could see it. I said, "This is Gran. 1974, she's 19. She's standing outside the Sheffield College of Technology." Gran looked at the photograph. Her face did something. I put the photograph on the table. I took out the taped offer letter. I held it up. I said, "This is her offer letter, a place on the Construction Management Foundation year." She taped it back together after it was torn. She kept it for 50 years in a tin on her kitchen shelf. Sophie found it. The room was very still. My Aunt Maureen said, "Eileen, what?" Gran said nothing. She was looking at the letter. I put it on the table next to the photograph. I took out the trust document. I placed it on the table. I said, "This is a trust, the Eileen Cooper Education Trust, funded for any member of this family who wants to study anything, anywhere, at any age. Rosie, her children after her, every daughter and every son. No conditions except wanting to go." I looked at my mother. She was standing very still. I said, "Gran had her letter torn in 1974. She taped it and stayed. She raised daughters who stayed. You burned mine in 2015. I left." I reached into the briefcase one final time. I took out my degree certificate. I put it on the table. I said, "I'm not angry. I'm not here to make a scene. I'm here because Rosie is 5 and I have met her for the first time today, and I will not let what happened to Gran happen to her." I looked at Rosie on the carpet. She had stopped building. She was watching me with the blocks in her hands. I said, "Rosie, if you ever want to go anywhere, study anything, build anything, there is money set aside that belongs to you. Nobody can touch it. Nobody can burn it. It's yours." Rosie looked at the table. She looked at me. She said, "Is that for me?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Can I keep building now?" I said, "Yes." She went back to her tower. My mother had not moved. She was standing at the edge of the dining room with her hands at her sides. I looked at her. I said, "Mum, I found Gran's letter." She said very quietly, "I didn't know she had kept it." I said, "Did you know she had one?" A long silence. She said, "She told me once, when I was about 16. She said she had applied for something when she was young and it hadn't worked out." I said, "Someone tore it." My mother looked at Gran. Gran was looking at the taped letter on the table. Gran said, "My mother." Nobody said anything. Gran said, "She said it wasn't what we did." The same words, 50 years apart. "It isn't what we do. This is not us." I looked at my mother. My mother looked at Gran. Gran was looking at the photograph of herself at 19. She said so quietly I almost didn't hear, "You look like me." I said, "Yes." She reached out and picked up the photograph. She held it in both hands. She did not say anything else. My mother came to the car when I was leaving. I was putting the briefcase in the boot. She stood on the pavement. She said, "I didn't know she had taped hers." I said, "I know." She said, "I didn't know I was." She stopped. I said, repeating it. She said, "Yes." I stood with my hand on the boot. She said, "I'm not asking you to forgive me for the letter." I said, "Good, because I'm not there yet." She nodded. She said, "Sophie's going to Leeds." I said, "I know." She said, "I'm not going to stop her." I looked at her. She said, "I'm not. I want you to know that." I said, "Thank you." She stood on the pavement. She looked at the briefcase. She said, "The trust, you named it after Mum." I said, "Yes." She said, why? I said, because she was the first one. Somewhere before her there was someone else, but she's as far back as I can see. It seemed right to name it for the place where I can see it starting. My mother was quiet. She said, do you think she's proud of you? I looked at the house. At the front door my gran had gone back through. I said, I think she's something more complicated than proud. My mother said, yes. She went back inside. I closed the boot. I got in the car. I sat for a moment, then I started the engine. Rosie started reception in September. Sophie sends me photographs. A drawing Rosie made of a bridge, her own, unprompted, apparently inspired by something she had seen on television. Crooked but structurally considered. I can see in the drawing that she has understood intuitively that the span needs support at the center. I sent her a set of wooden building blocks for her birthday. She sent me a photograph of a tower 8 blocks high with a note in Sophie's handwriting that said, she says it's a column, not a tower. She says columns hold things up. She is 5 years old. She is going to be fine. Sophie started at Leeds in October. She called me on her first day from outside the engineering building. She was laughing. She said the building was bigger than she had expected. She said she had already spoken to 2 people from her course and one of them was from Bradford, which she found funny. I said, how does it feel? She said, like I'm allowed to be here. I said, you are allowed to be here. She said, I know, it just feels good to feel it. I visited Gran in the care home in November. She was in the chair by the window the way she liked, a cup of tea going cold on the side table, a large print crossword open on her lap, 2 clues filled in. I sat beside her. She looked at me. She said, you came back. I said, I did. She said, you brought the letter. I said, yes. She was quiet for a moment. She picked up her teacup. She set it back down. She said, I should have gone. I said, yes. She said, you went for me. I looked at her. She said, that's what it felt like when you put that letter on the table, like watching someone do the thing I didn't do. I said, you couldn't have, not then. She said, no. She picked up her crossword. She said, what's a 7-letter word for framework? I said, lattice. She wrote it in. She nodded. She did not say anything else about the letter. Some things are finished in the saying once. Here is what I know about load paths. A force enters a structure and it travels. It doesn't disappear. It moves through the members, joint to joint, until it reaches the ground. If the structure is well designed, the force is distributed, spread across many members, no single one carrying more than it was built for. If the structure is poorly designed, the force concentrates. It finds the weakest point and it gathers there, and eventually that point fails. My family was a poorly designed structure. The force, the thing that had been passed from my great-grandmother to my gran to my mother to me, concentrated in the women, in the eldest daughter, in the one who was told to stay. It gathered there generation to generation and the structure held because the women held it. But the holding cost everything. I am an engineer. I do not accept poorly designed structures as permanent. I redesign them. The trust is not revenge. The trust is a redesign. It redistributes the load. It says, no single person carries this. Every member of this structure has a path out that does not require them to break first. Rosie will not be told to stay. She will be told she can go anywhere and that she will be loved just as completely when she gets there. Gran's taped letter is in a frame above my desk now. Next to it, my own. 2 letters, 2 women, 50 years apart. The tape on Gran's is brown and cracked and still holding. The tape on mine is sellotape, which yellows slower. It will outlast me. I look at them every morning before I start work. Every morning I think, the force stops here. It took the women in my family 50 years to find someone willing to redesign the structure. I am glad it was me. I am glad it happened before Rosie was old enough to be told to stay. If you grew up being told that where you were was where you belonged, that wanting to go somewhere else was a kind of disloyalty, I want you to know that is not truth. That is load. That is what happens when a structure concentrates force in one place and calls it tradition. You are allowed to redistribute it. Drop a comment. Tell me what your version of this looked like. Tell me what you taped back together. Tell me where you went. And if Anna's story reached you today, share it with someone who is being told to stay. She might not know yet that leaving is an option. Tell her it is. Tell her there is a trust with her name on it, even if it isn't money. Even if it's just the knowledge that someone went first. Someone went first. Subscribe. I will see you tomorrow.